As I was introduced, my name is Mochizuki. Today, various martial arts experts have explained Budo and Bujutsu from a number of points of view. I too would like to talk about Budo and Bujutsu collectively. I think that perhaps there are some among you who have already understood the difference between Bujutsu and Budo, but there are many who are not sure about this point. I say this because there is much interest in the various martial arts, and so many books written about these topics, but they seldom describe the distinction between Bujutsu and Budo. So I would first like to clarify this distinction. Today, although many of the world's cultures are highly developed, still extremely barbarous acts are often committed. Those who have children are concerned by the problems of bullying. I personally believe that children who bully other children are acting according to their instincts, something which living things naturally possess, and so we should not blame them too much for their acts. Instead, I think that those who are bullied need to be educated. Among theories still important in today's world is Darwinism. About 200 years ago, a man named Darwin was born in England, and at middle age he bought a small old ship and explored the islands of the South Seas. Most of these islands were uninhabited. There were various animals living on these islands, and he collected specimens. He took a number of animals and of course plants on board and returned to his country, England. The voyage lasted about 5 years. The specimens he collected were really wonderful. While organizing these specimens, he discovered that there was one law in the evolution of animals. This constituted Darwin's theory of evolution. It is called Darwinism. In the theory of animal evolution, there is one absolute rule, that is, the survival of the fittest. The survival of the fittest, the strong surviving by eating the weak. This competition served as the stimulus of evolution. All animals live according to this rule. This is not idle talk on the part of Darwin. It has been proven scientifically and from many different angles in different countries of the world. This rule not only holds among animal societies, but also among human beings. There is no doubt that human beings are also animals. In our societies, we don't find situations where some men catch others to eat them, but we do see in our daily lives small businesses being devoured by large businesses. Although it may be too strong an expression, large enterprises are living off of small businesses. They use small businesses to grow bigger. I believe that here, too, there is a struggle for existence, and the theory of survival of the fittest applies. In this survival of the fittest, where the strong eat the weak, well, eat may not be the proper word, but the strong put the weak under their control. Strong nations conquer and colonize weak nations. The period when Darwin's theory of evolution was published was one in which European countries most invaded Asian nations. Strong nations are able to colonize weak nations to exploit them, and this is proven scientifically by the theory of the survival of the fittest. In this way, their acts of invasion were justified. The strong bully the weak, and then the weak also possess an instinct of self-defense or self-preservation, which is a natural characteristic. The self-preservation instinct. Everyone has this instinct. If one drops something and it falls on his foot, he will sense danger and try to move his foot away from it. Or when one tries to carry a kettle which is quite hot, he will remove his hand from the kettle to avoid being burned. These are all examples of the self-preservation instinct. We do these things reflexively. This is the self-preservation instinct. As this gradually develops, it becomes a defensive power. You will understand this if you see the Great Wall of China. Mongolians, who are a horse-riding people, and nomadic groups lived there. I also lived in Mongolia and saw the actual conditions firsthand. The southern section below the Great Wall of China was suitable for farming. The weather was good and it rained often. A large section of the area was suitable for farming, especially the land near the Yellow River and the Yangtze River were the most developed areas. But the northern region of the Great Wall of China was terrible. It was cold in the winter and hot and dry in the summer. It was terribly dry. In Mongolia, the amount of rain in 1 year is about the same as 1 day of slightly heavy rain in Japan. They can't do farming there. So they have sheep and cows eat the grass there and wait until they grow large and kill them for food. They allow the sheep to graze. This doesn't mean they have a pasture, just a field where the sheep walk around in the grassy areas until they become big and ready for slaughter. However, periodically they have droughts. These are areas where the amount of rain in a year is equivalent to 1 day in Japan. There are years when they don't even get that amount of rain. On such occasions, as may be expected, all of the plants die. Then all of the cattle die. This is a cause for immediate life and death concern for cattle raising and hunting peoples. These peoples then attack farmers in great force. They plunder the grain and other foodstuffs held by the farms and then return to their fields. Such things occurred several thousand years before the birth of Genghis Khan. This was why the farmers built the Great Wall of China, a long, huge stone wall which protected them from the horse-mounted attackers. They were nomads on horseback. When these horse-riding peoples attacked the farmers, they would use large sickles. A Japanese sickle is an implement you can use with one hand, and that is fine for farmers. But cattle-raising peoples have to cut grass for thousands of livestock during the summer, and thus Japanese-like tools don't serve. The handle of the sickle they use is more than 2 yards long, while the blade width is about 31 inches wide, with 2 branches attached to it. They place the smaller branch to the side and hold the longer one and swing it using the movement of their hips. In this way, they can cut a 3 or 4 yard length, 30 inches wide, with one swing. It is a wonderfully efficient sickle, and I used it for farming for a while. It is also excellent exercise because you twist your body. These are the weapons the horse-mounted nomads used in their attacks. The farmers thus protected themselves from the sickles of their attackers. This is the origin of the Chinese character Bu. In other words, Bu, or martial power, means defensive power. Recently, this term has come to be misunderstood, and people associate martial power with violence. The violence they refer to is this. Violence means that the strong bully the weak, and the defensive power against this violence is called martial power. The techniques of martial power gradually developed and gave birth to Bujutsu, or the martial arts. The martial arts are the formulation of the techniques of martial power. Jutsu are techniques. The Bujutsu have undergone tremendous development. Take the demonstrations of the previous senseis, especially the demonstration of the sword and staff by Sugino sensei. The Bujutsu have continuously developed. It has developed into the rational techniques explained by Shioda sensei. There have been important innovations in Bujutsu. Since Bujutsu were created in order to strengthen defensive power, there were, of course, training methods for improving defensive power. For example, for the strengthening of soldiers. Bujutsu includes the strengthening of soldiers. However, just explaining these methods is not interesting. So in order to increase the soldiers' interest in Bujutsu, competitions were introduced to season them for battle. What eventually developed out of this is sport. In the sports of today, we still find vestiges of the old Bujutsu in such events as the javelin, discus, and shot putting. These competitions constituted one of the methods of strengthening soldiers and later became sports. Then, about 100 years ago, during the Meiji Restoration, a man named Jigoro Kano was born. He was very intelligent and entered what later became the Imperial University at age 18. There were many foreign professors in those days, from Germany, France, and England. Since they couldn't speak Japanese, their students had to learn English, French, and German thoroughly in order to understand the lectures. This school, where students mainly studied languages, was called the Kaisei School. And Kano sensei enrolled there, where all the brilliant students gathered, when he was 18. He entered as a freshman. Later, the Kaisei School became the Imperial University. He studied there for 4 years, studying mainly economics and political science. When he graduated from the university, he continued at the same school, this time majoring in philosophy. He stayed at the university for a very long time. Although he entered as a freshman, he graduated when a sophomore. He was really brilliant. Kano sensei was recognized as a man of promise and was welcomed as a professor at Gakushin University, where the elite of Japan studied at that time. The present emperor was also a student of Kano sensei in those days. Thus, he graduated from Kaisei School and Teikoku University, and then began to teach at Gakushuin University. However, the students he had to deal with were the children of prominent people. Naturally, some of these students were the mischievous type, but they were few in number. Since these children were brought up in sheltered circumstances, they were sissy types. Thus, Kano sensei realized that he should build up their constitutions rather than talk to them about theory. He himself had fallen ill as a student by overstudying, and thus practiced jujitsu, only a few schools of which had remained in those days. By studying these martial arts, he was able to greatly improve his health. Consequently, Kano-sensei thought he should also teach these arts to students in order to provide them with a double education which included the physical area. He further studied and analyzed the techniques of jujitsu and discovered rational principles in them which were readily applicable to physical education. For example, would someone come here for a moment? You have seen this technique. Now assume I am accosted by a rough type person. If I try to escape like this, it's difficult. But please grab strongly. If I do this, achoo, instead I can escape easily. It is not because I sneezed. I was able to escape because I twisted my arm this way. He grabbed me with his 5 fingers, so it is difficult to resist. You may be able to escape if you are really strong, but not usually. However, if you attack this one finger, like this, you can escape naturally. If you attack his weak part, you can escape. Since you do this movement quickly, you can throw your opponent very quickly, which impresses people. If you enjoy yourself by impressing people, you are still immature. If you explain this and move this way, you can escape. You certainly can escape not by dealing with all 5 fingers at once, but just one. This is a principle or axiom of mechanics. Power works against the least resistive part. If I say such things, some of you here who are experts in science and physics may laugh at me for talking about something that is known as a matter of course. However, we deal with children and beginners, and I have a habit of saying these things. I really feel embarrassed. This axiom of mechanics is that power works against the least resistive part. In other words, if you attack the weakest part, you will be able to escape. For example, when it rains heavily, the river flows over the banks. As you know, the bank will break at the weakest spot. This principle of mechanics is the same as this. What has been developed technically for the principle makes possible the demonstrations you have seen today, where the opponents fall down immediately. You were only seeing the surface of the principle. It is not anything false, but is based on rational principles. Earlier, I showed a technique for freeing your hand. That was not done with power. I did it by moving in the proper manner. I went against his weakest points, in other words. However, he is also weak from this angle. My opponent is standing on 2 legs. It would be difficult if he had 3 legs, but fortunately he has only 2. Since he is standing along this line, if I move his hand in this direction, he will fall. So if I move in this direction, he becomes unstable. Also, if I hold him in this way and step forward, it is natural for him to fall. If he had 3 legs, it wouldn't work. But since he has only 2 legs, he will definitely fall. By the same token, if I enter like this and place my hand here, he will also fall. It is extremely rational. Some of you in the audience may have practiced judo. I don't talk about this much recently, but Jigoro Kano sensei studied jujitsu and realized its potential for developing weak youth into strong, healthy young people. He negotiated with the Ministry of Education and succeeded in having all secondary schools in Japan include martial arts training in their curricula. What finally persuaded the Ministry of Education to agree to include martial arts in the regular curricula was rational principles. What was needed after the Meiji Restoration was rationalism. I believe it was rationalism which made people stop wearing a topknot, which was a continuous obstruction on the top of the head. A sword was also obstructive. There were no longer wars, and so the wearing of swords was abolished in order to keep individuals from using them against each other. They are obstructions. I often practice Ei. Even one sword is obstructive if you carry it around. 2 swords are even more of an obstruction, so they stopped carrying them. This decision was also based on rational thinking. Thus, in order to teach this rational way of thinking at school as an educational method, they thought teaching jujitsu would be the best way. But they didn't call it jujitsu, but rather judo. This jujitsu was different from the traditional jujitsu. The content was the same, but the name was changed. The reason is that jutsu, as I mentioned earlier, means techniques. Kano sensei included these techniques into the educational curricula as a means to guide the youth. Michi or way means to lead. Michi is a way or path. A road can lead not only people but also animals like dogs to their destination safely and easily. Michibiki is to lead or hear, to educate. Michibiki is the education of people. Michi is education. Although what they were doing was exactly the same as jujutsu, the name of the art was changed, and there lies the difference in its essential qualities. Traditionally, the purpose of jujutsu was to take and throw people. However, now the purpose was different. They changed its purpose for the education of youth. Therefore, the name Jutsu was changed into Do. Although I have been talking about complicated things, I believe that you now understand the difference between Bujutsu and Budo. Now, I would again like to talk about the techniques we practice. The techniques Shioda sensei, as well as the other teachers demonstrated earlier, were mainly called Aiki. Aiki News is the sponsor of this second friendship demonstration. Therefore, this is a gathering of Aikido people. I entered the Aikido Dojo 50 years ago, and the art was called Aiki Jujutsu then. What is Aiki? Each person has a different theory on this, but in Aiki you harmonize your ki with your opponent's. How? Shioda sensei did it beautifully. An opponent has ki ready to attack you, and you get ahead of him. This is Aiki. You harmonize your ki exactly with your opponent's attacking ki. Then you proceed one more step to a rational place to defeat him. In this way, the technique is applied in a flash. You perceive this ki, his attacking ki, quickly, and immediately deal with it in an appropriate manner. This is the way of Aiki, of Aikido. You have already understood it through the demonstrations of Shioda sensei and the other teachers, so I don't have to show you. But Aiki Jujutsu is different from the usual Jujutsu. When I was a boy, I learned a Jujutsu style called Gyokushin-ryu. This Jujutsu was different from Aiki Jujutsu. How is it different? Aiki Jujutsu is derived from the Ken or sword. Kenjutsu became an empty-handed art and changed into a jujutsu form. In the Gyokushin-ryu style I practice, we did various movements like twisting hands and throwing the opponent with stemi techniques. There were many techniques which greatly differed from the techniques of Kendo. However, Aiki Jujutsu techniques developed from the sword. Now I would like to show you how these Ken or sword techniques became Aikido forms. I hope you will observe the demonstration carefully. We are going to demonstrate what sword form became what Aikido form. That is, what we call mutejutsu, or empty-handed techniques. In this technique, after dodging the sword of the opponent who comes to thrust you, you seize his wrist. This is the sword form. Then, when it is changed to the jujutsu form, the opponent comes to attack you with a sword. This is the jujutsu form. If we use the term used by the Yagyu school, it is Emono-dori. This is a technique for taking a real sword which Kenjutsu masters studied at the risk of their lives. Now this time, we have an empty-handed attacker and an empty-handed defender. This is a changed form of the kote-dori technique we just showed you. You can see that from this form. Now here, when the opponent comes to attack you aiming at your wrist, you slide up his sword and attack the top of his wrist. When the opponent comes to attack your wrist with a sword, you dodge it instantly and then immediately enter. This is a basic form of mutejutsu against a sword. I think you have seen this type of technique several times by now, but in this, you escape from the hand of the opponent, but then again he tries to grab you, and you attack his wrist. This is a technique called tekubi kudaki. It is a basic technique where you avoid the sword of the opponent who comes to attack you and immediately slide up your sword. This technique doesn't score any points in the present kendo competitions, but it is really wonderful as a sword technique in a real situation. This is the case of an empty-handed defender against a sword. Here, you are just using the hand instead of a sword in executing an immediate attack to his neck. In jujutsu terms, this is called mukai daoshi. When the opponent comes to cut you, while moving your body to avoid his attack, you raise his wrist from below and then strike down on his wrist and then cut his shoulder. In this technique, you dodge his sword, which is aiming at your forehead, sliding your sword up and strike his waist, hips, and then strike his shoulder as you turn around. This is what is called shihonage in Aikido. It is the case where the opponent attacks you with a sword. This is the usual shihonage in Aikido. These techniques all originated from sword movements. These theoretical relationships between Jujutsu and Kenjutsu are a fundamental characteristic. In most cases in Aikido, as well as other arts including Kendo, you use the principle of go no sen, where the person who is receiving the attack of his opponent attacks him back. However, human beings are not easy to deal with. In the old days, there was a saying which went, if you scold someone, he will get angry. If you strike him, he will cry. And if you kill him, he will come back to haunt you as a ghost in the middle of the night. As you can see from this saying, human beings are not that easy to deal with. We think that even if we are defeated, we don't want to admit it. How can we escape from the technique of the opponent? If we escape, then how can we counterattack him? This form in which these points are contained is uradori no kata. Even if you are grabbed, if you twist your wrist instantly, his technique will no longer work on you. Even with this shihonage technique, if you turn quickly, you can escape from his counterattack. This time, they both execute ura techniques on each other, and then in the end, you can throw your opponent with kata guruma. In this form, after executing an ura technique on each other, you throw the opponent at the end to conclude the movement. Now we would like to demonstrate our way of practicing randori before finishing. First, we would like to show you our method of practicing hand techniques. The techniques we are going to show you are stemi waza, or sacrifice techniques, which are a characteristic of Yoseikan Budo. This is Emono-dori, or sword taking. We have shown you Yoseikan Aikido, and we would like to conclude our demonstration here. Thank you very much.